Sriranga Khare and I am here on behalf of group number 2 in order to introduce today's guests on the panel. Firstly, as the interviewer, we have Jedidia, who is going to ask questions to the interviewee, Dr. Connor Judge, about the Ukraine war and the conflict surrounding the Ukraine war. Please give it up for them.
Good morning. This is Jerry Abin from 2nd MA, and today we have the abject pleasure of sitting here with Dr. Connor Judge. Dr. Connor Judge is a fellow from Harvard and from Yenching Institute, and he is a specialist in political sciences, international studies, and history. Today, we should delve into the complexities of the Ukraine war and its effects. Dr. Connor, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you for having me here today. I'm happy to take this interview.
Yeah. One of the most common questions of the Ukraine war. I'm going to ask you that. What are the causes of the Ukraine war, according to you?
Now, the causes of the Ukraine war can't really be attributed to one source. If you ask people in India and many other countries like Serbia, for example, they'll say that the cause of the Ukraine war was because NATO provoked Russia. Okay? Because NATO was expanding into Russia's former sphere of influence, and Russia saw that its security was existentially threatened, thus triggering the invasion. But I think that it has more to do with the Russians' desire to bring Ukraine back into its fold, to cut off eastern Ukraine, which is populated by predominantly Russian speakers, and also extract Ukraine's strategic resources. So a combination of these factors is generally what started the war. But we could also talk about some ideational factors. This is like the culture, because Kiev, particularly the capital of Ukraine, is the origin hub of Slavic civilization. And Vladimir Putin, the current president, quite in the mold of Peter the Great, has seen that this is a way of reclaiming the former glory of these Slavic empires, right?
That was very interesting.
So you have a combination of material and cultural factors.
And a little bit of imperialism as well.
And imperialism, yes, all are at play. You can't attribute it to just one cause.
Moving on, I do know that you have visited Ukraine during the wartime, which I believe is a very, very brave thing to do personally. I do admire you for that. With respect to what you saw there, what do you think are the effects of the war on the social landscape in Ukraine, social and political in Ukraine?
It's interesting. Just after the war started, I went to the Ukrainian embassy and I volunteered to offer help as where I could. I was given approval. Went to Poland, to the city called Rzeszów, and I went to the border post called Przemyśl, and I found many people, volunteers going into Ukraine. They were either humanitarian volunteers, sometimes soldiers with former military experience who were going to go join the Ukrainian military and fight, and all sorts. And I went to Poland on several trips. When I went into Ukraine itself, that was another interesting experience because I could see people at the border being separated from their families. There was a huge influx of refugees in early March, people freezing in the cold in the train stations, and there were enough volunteers to provide for their needs, but families, people's household pets, children, it was really kind of a chaotic situation. And I think after mid-March the situation normalized, and that's when I went into Ukraine. And socially it was interesting because they were under martial law, especially in Lviv, where I was, which is in western Ukraine.
Yeah, Western Ukraine.
And the martial law had a few conditions. One was the komandirovka, which is the curfew. It's like people weren't allowed to be outside of their houses after 10. Alcohol also was restricted. You couldn't sell or drink hard alcohol, only beer and things like that. Because people have to go about their daily life, but constantly you have these air raid sirens going off. So that was a big worry. People need to know where the nearest shelters are so that they can take shelter. Lots of armed police walking around with AK-47s, sandbags stacked on the lower window sills of buildings, in preparation for subsequent Russian attacks. But toward that point, there wasn't really a risk that Russia could invade the western part of Ukraine, but they absolutely could continue to launch missile strikes and drone strikes. And Lviv has been particularly heavily hit in terms of its infrastructure.
If I'm not wrong,
Yes.
Lviv is one of the biggest cities in Ukraine, right?
Lviv is one of the biggest cities in Ukraine. Historically, it was a Polish city.
Yes.
But you have this, kind of nexus, this people-to-people connection with Poland, which is why on the Polish side you really saw volunteers stepping up and offering their homes, offering their help to all of those refugees that were finding themselves in
It's
Europe.
a
It was a beautiful thing at the time, and now relations have kind of soured. But at that time, I think Poland can be very proud of its actions, for sure.
Yes, it's beautiful.
Yes.
Moving on, let's talk about the war directly. As you know, it's almost 600 days
Yes.
since the start of the war. How was the
Yes.
war turned out for both sides in terms of strategic and tactical goals? This includes both Russia, Ukraine, and Ukrainian allies.
In terms of strategic and tactical goals, I think the important thing to note is that while Ukraine has not made significant territorial gains in the aftermath of its counteroffensive launched in the summer, it is still wearing the Russians down in a big way. Ukrainian ZSU, right? So that's the defense forces. They are very efficient, and the special forces are very efficient, and they are very capable of continuing to fight this war. But to do that, they need further military support from backers like the US. And I think strategically, if not enough support is given to Ukraine before the end of this year, we could see that Ukraine will have to accept the current line of conflict as it stands, and it will become a frozen conflict. Yes, just like happened in 2020, just as like has happened with Crimea in 2014. And this sets a dangerous precedent because Russia can basically get away with annexing the territory of a sovereign state in a very blatant way.
They don't control any of the territory though. See, just how legal is that?
Russia does control the territory in Ukraine, but they control it through oppression. They hold sham elections, and it has no basis in international law. Over time, as with many occupations around the world, time tells all, and in the next 20 years, people may start to accept that these parts of Ukraine are a part of Russia. But that's why it's so important now to gain every patch of ground that they can.
Yes,
before it becomes frozen.
Yes, because the war is heading towards that. Both sides are. It seems like both the lines are barely moving nowadays.
Yes. And strategically, this has all been in the US and the EU's interest, right? Russia has been significantly weakened militarily and will continue to be weakened. But this has come at the cost of their own economic growth too, because especially countries like Germany, they were so dependent on Russian energy, and now there's been a price cap, which has been mandated, a huge wave of sanctions. This all affects the global economy. No one is really immune from the Russia-Ukraine war, even though they think it's not relevant to them.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. And who started the Russia-Ukraine war? It's the aggressor. It's the country that decided to invade another country. No one can make the argument that Russia had these legitimate concerns against NATO, that it needed to intervene in the conflict.
In any case, invading and doing whatever in another country,
Yes.
I do not believe that is the
Yes.
right way to go about it.
Well,
Yes,
but
indeed.
personally, that's what I think, and I'm sure many would agree that they do not have a basis in international law to annex any part of Ukraine.
Absolutely. I don't think any country has recognized those annexations of the 4 oblasts.
Some countries have,
They do not.
like North Korea, for example. I don't know about Iran, but Iran has certainly been giving Russia a huge number of military drones, and Russia
Syria?
uses these drones to attack civilians.
Yes.
Um, and it's indiscriminate. They kill children almost every single day. Okay, and this has been going on for 600 days, and it
Almost.
really shows no signs of abating. I think global attention has been shifted toward other conflicts in the world. We have the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We have the conflict between Serbia and Kosovo, which hasn't broken out yet, but is in
It's
danger
still
of
very
breaking
tense.
out.
Yes.
Yes, we have the Israeli-Hamas war, and we have the Ukraine war. And I think all of these issues are important, but the Ukraine issue will have most ramifications for the future of global prosperity, really.
Hmm?
Yeah.
That's actually quite interesting.
Mm.
You mentioned the Israel-Hamas war. You do know that that broke out a while back. This might be a controversial question, but just how much of an effect does the Israel-Hamas war have on the aid and on the preparation that is being offered to Ukraine?
Well, for the moment, at least in the U.S., there's been this tangential budget issue that they weren't able to pass the latest budget without taking Ukraine funding out of the agenda, which is quite unfortunate at this critical time. And the Biden administration is trying to use other mechanisms to give Ukraine the support, but it's not in the billions of dollars that it used to be. So that was already a problem, but now the media cycle, which is focused on the Israeli-Hamas war, has taken all of the air out of the situation. It's given Russia this reprieve, so that they feel emboldened to continue their attacks on Ukraine, and they feel like they can strategically maneuver other alliances in a way that undermines the West. Russia has come out in favor of Hamas,
Yes.
actually. And that's surprising because India and Russia's relations are ironclad, right? This goes back to the 1971 conflict with Pakistan, and maybe
Yes.
even further. So Russia has proved that it can be a tried and true friend to India, but Russia is supporting a terrorist organization that India has roundly condemned. Okay. And also, Russia is becoming more and more dependent on China, militarily and strategically. And I imagine that this would have complications for India, especially if China can pull the strings in Russia. For sure.
There are indeed quite a few ramifications for India. The the Indian government will have to rethink its policy towards Russia.
And I have a further point to counter this idea that NATO has expanded into Russia. NATO has not expanded into Russia. These countries that share a border with Russia have actively advocated to join NATO.
Yes.
They've pushed, they've begged to join NATO. The Baltic states, because they suffered what can be considered a genocide during the Soviet occupation, they have decided that the only thing that can guarantee their security from the Russians is NATO. And that's proven to be true. Imagine if Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia were not in NATO when the war broke out. They would be fair game
Yes,
for an invasion.
They're
They share a border with Belarus.
particularly Lithuania.
Yes. Yeah, and so we've seen two new NATO members that
Finland
share
and
borders with
Sweden.
Russia. Finland has acceded to the NATO, and this has extended the physical
More than
border with
doubled,
Russia.
if I'm
Yeah,
not
more than
wrong.
doubled. Yes. Yeah, and Sweden is joining, but we have got Turkey and Hungary, which are kind of blocking.
I have
Sweden's
actually received recent news that Erdogan is maneuvering towards approving Sweden's entry if he gets a go on F-15s or F-35s, from what I
Yes.
remember.
He views this as a bargaining chip.
Yes.
And that's interesting. Turkey has a lot of collaboration with both NATO and Russia. They're standing in the middle and kind of playing both sides. Whereas India, I feel, is pursuing this policy of multi-alignment and non-alignment. That means we go with Russia, we go with the U.S., we go with everyone as our interest dictates. But it may not be as cohesive as Western observers would like it to be. The danger of this is, of course, sanctions, which could come to countries that are supporting Russia and companies that are supporting Russia.
For now, India has managed to remain mostly neutral. Just how long do you think this policy will be fruitful for India?
India can remain neutral because they're an emerging great power, but India doesn't just want to stand by and let events unfold. They want to take an active role in it. It's one thing to say we are Switzerland. We are not engaging in any conflicts in the world. We're going to focus on our domestic issues. But India is taking a kind of a strident role in international affairs.
Yes.
They're choosing to be a part of these discussions in an effort to secure their own interests. And you can't tell any country that they can't pursue their interests, but there's trade-offs, indeed.
Mm, it is quite a difficult position. So thank you, Dr. Connor. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. It was a honor.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
That will be all.
Thank you to our resource person, Dr. Connor Judge, for talking to us today, and also Jedediah Eben, our interviewer for the day. Thank you both for the contribution that you have made to our project.